Hi everyone, thanks for joining. My name is Margaret Martonosi. I am, as of February, NSF's Assistant Director for the Computer and Information Science and Engineering Directorate, and I'm a rotator from Princeton University. So here's the plan for today. I've broken the talk into two parts and there'll be live Q&A after each part. So I like to think about research in terms of this metaphor. This picture is of a tree that's actually in my backyard, not far from here. My husband and I love this tree. We benefit a lot from its shade. We've never met the person who planted it. And in particular, a lot of different cultures actually have a saying or a metaphor like that about how one generation plants the trees for another generation to benefit. When we think about writing a paper, writing a research proposal, we're basically planting a tree in the hopes that 20 years from now, it might offer some benefit, some shade for someone else. Likewise, the fact that we're able to come together virtually like this right now is because of trees that were planted in the past. The notion of research investments in high-speed networking and advanced graphics processing help us create the virtual interactions that we're benefiting from right now. So I'm not going to play this video in this format, but I'll ask for CRA to post it as well. As I have been giving virtual campus visits and as I've started in my role as CISE AD, I've started asking members of the community to help tell the stories of long-term impact that their work demonstrates. If you have a story you want to tell, please send me some slides, send me a 3-minute video. As one example of this, Professor Vikram Adve from the University of Illinois put together a 3-minute retrospective about the LLVM compiler infrastructure, which came out of relatively modest investments, including a career award 20 years ago, and has now sort of evolved into an ecosystem that is clearly of great use to experimentalists in compilers and architecture, but more broadly has had huge impact on the real world in terms of being how software arrives at our Apple devices and many other different aspects. One of the things that I can also highlight here is the degree to which LLVM is not just research in and of itself, but is actually research infrastructure, and that'll be a theme that'll go through this talk. And finally, I want to use this slide to note that the career proposal deadline, which would normally have been July 27th, has been extended to August 11th. So I hope that if you are a younger faculty member listening to this talk, you'll keep in mind that extension. So let's take a look at CISE by the numbers. This is for fiscal year 2019. In that year, the budget was just under $1 billion and just under 9,000 proposals came in. In response, CISE was able to fund 2,000 awards and support around 20,000 people. A couple of things of note. First of all, NSF funds over 85% of the federally funded academic CS research in the US. So this is very exciting because it means that when the US has a problem, when the world sees a research opportunity, we have a huge set of outstanding researchers who can go after that. On the other hand, this 85% is also a huge responsibility because with these ever-growing opportunities, we need to keep being able to fund them. I'm happy to say that the fiscal year 2020 budget that we're currently operating with has CISE's budget at over $1 billion, just barely, but for the first time in its lifetime. The fiscal year 21 President's budget request, which is the beginning of the FY21 budgeting process, has CISE going up roughly 5%, despite a recommendation for NSF to go down 6.5%. Some of the distinctions here have to do with the degree to which national and societal priorities around AI, quantum, and advanced wireless align well with CISE's portfolio. But obviously, we also use these numbers to further motivate our desire to collaborate with the other directorates as well. So in essence, what CISE does, one way to think about what CISE does is this. If you had $1 billion a year, what research would you spend it on and what trees would you plant? And you have to be mindful in all of that of the fact that while $1 billion sounds big and is, it has to be metered out across that large community of 20,000 or more researchers, thousands of proposals in a way that is sort of engendering wise investments that will give the best payoff later, and leveraged by as many partnerships and other mechanisms as make sense. So what I'll talk about in the remainder of this first half are the technical themes and budget overview, and then a brief touch on recent events as well. So when I think about SISE, I think about it in terms of inflection points and the themes that emanate out of those inflection points. And the point of these three themes is not to say that these are narrow paths through our research space, but rather to say that these are fairly broad umbrellas for which most SISE researchers will find themselves in not just one, but maybe two or three of these. So the first, SISE in a post-war world and the seismic shift, has to do with the trends that we're seeing where technology and applications are seeing a confluence. So part of this is the end of Dennard scaling and the slowing of Moore's law that's imposing key changes on our hardware. We're increasingly embracing heterogeneous specialized parallelism, for example, but it's also changing our software as well, and I think that's the key observation. We're increasingly programming to fairly high-level APIs like TensorFlow and PyTorch, and in many cases, those are being compiled down directly to accelerators or circuits. So where we used to have these neat horizontal layers of circuits, architecture, compilers, applications, we now have a very different ecosystem. And where we used to think lopsidedly about performance, we now have a huge array of goals like reliability, security, and fairness. And so I think about all this upheaval as a seismic shift. That's why I show this picture. This is the water pocket fold in Utah, where the neat horizontal sedimentary layers have been tipped sideways. And this is not too different from the vertical stacks that we now see in things like TensorFlow and PyTorch. So you could look at me and say, well, she's an architect, so of course she's talking about this. But I really want to stress the degree to which this goes way beyond hardware. This is a fundamental reshaping of how software is built. It's a fundamental reshaping of how system reliability and verifiability and security will play out, because if all these layers are changing, the reliability of the system is likely to be impacted as well. And finally, I think it's time to think about what our curricula look like, given that most of our curricula are organized around these horizontal layers, despite the fact that they are changing fast. So one of the ways that SISE has responded to this seismic shift is in terms of a new program called Principles and Practice of Scalable Systems, PPOS, which had its first deadline in April, and will have subsequent deadlines each January for the next couple of years. So PPOS specifically wants to bring researchers together across these traditionally layered topic areas to look at modern ways of designing these systems. So yes, performance, but also increasingly studying how issues of security, privacy, verifiability, and reliability are impacted by these issues as well. The second theme I want to talk about, I call the transcendence of artificial intelligence, and I use that word transcendence purposefully. In particular, most of our field knows that AI is quite old. It dates back essentially to the origins of electronic computing itself. But it's clearly changed over the years from being its own topic area or subfield to now transcending our whole field. And in fact, advances in AI are deeply transforming the society and economy in so many different ways. What we know is that that was not simply a matter of a few good AI approaches or algorithms, but rather a whole of size convergence with algorithms converging alongside the availability of appropriate and at-scale data sets, along with ample system capabilities. So if you look at the National AI Strategic Plan, it takes this broader view, and I think we would all agree that it is this convergence view that is what is going to take AI forward. NSF actually already invests over $500 million in AI annually, and the blue wedge here shows that SISE represents the vast majority of that, over $300 million a year. The blue box over here denotes the fact that actually in the President's budget request for fiscal year 21, which is currently being considered by Congress, there's an additional plus up in the AI area recommended. So what is NSF and CISE doing when it comes to AI? One large-scale effort that we've organized is around the notion of National AI Research Institutes. So these are intended to be large-scale, $20 million per center hubs where academic researchers can partner with federal agencies, industry, and nonprofits to advance AI research and education, to bring really important use-inspired and fundamental research into academic settings where we can both advance the research agenda and also create the next generation of AI workforce. For the first solicitation, there were 6 institutes planned. The 4 use-inspired ones are the green columns you see here, and 2 cross-cutting foundational ones were themes in the solicitation as well. Those review processes are well underway, and we hope to have an announcement about them this summer. I guess the other thing I'll mention here is that this first solicitation has been in partnership with other federal agencies. So, for example, the U.S. Department of Agriculture partners with us on precision agriculture and so on. We're also working on the second solicitation for the National AI Research Institutes that will generate new themes and also some new partnerships. So stay tuned for that. So that's AI Research Institutes are one part of the AI portfolio, and there's obviously a huge emphasis on core AI spending. But in addition to the research institutes and the core, there's also other named activities around AI investments and strategic partnerships that help us both leverage the funding, but also make sure that important topics are brought to bear. So, for example, fairness, ethics, accountability, and transparency in AI. And so you can see a list of some of those here, including most recently an announcement earlier this month of an NSF Intel set of awards around machine learning in wireless. The last thing that I want to mention within the AI portion of my talk, it might be a little bit surprising to you. This is an infrastructure grant that was funded $9 million a year for 3 years through an NSF program called Mid-Scale Research Infrastructure. It's AI relevant because of its notion of inference at the edge as part of optimizing and improving the environmental sensing that it does. But one of the reasons why I specifically want to mention it is because I want to really draw attention to the Mid-Scale Research Infrastructure program and make sure that CISE researchers know about it and think about when to use it. It's intended, Mid-Scale Research Infrastructure is intended to be a place to go for fairly large funding. $6 to $20 million is called Mid-Scale Research 1, and $20 to $75 million is Mid-Scale Research 2. So fairly large amounts of funding for infrastructure related to national needs. And I want you to think broadly about what an infrastructure is. In particular, software, like that LLVM example from my first slide, software can be infrastructure. In addition, data can be infrastructure. I think we can all imagine data sets like ImageNet and the value that they have brought to our community. And it's time for us to think about what are the next levels of software, data, and hardware infrastructure that represent a national need, and how can we go after creating them. So the third of these technical themes I refer to as CISE's Sociotechnical frontier. And this is extremely broad and increasingly important. In particular, CISE's Sociotechnical frontier means many things to many people, but clearly cyber-physical and cyber-human interactions increasingly shape our society and our economy at all levels and in many forms. So where does this show up? It shows up in advanced wireless research, connectivity and the digital divide. It shows up in our Smart and Connected Communities program and the Civic Innovation Challenge. Smart and Connected Health, where we're talking about the computational aspects of health systems and devices. Robotics and human-robot interfaces, natural language processing, and so forth. Across all of these, you can see this convergence. There's a need for ample computing resources, well-defined programming models, and also an appreciation of how that interface to the human world or to society shapes how the designs work best. Across all of this, there's a real sense of responsibility meets opportunity. We have the responsibility to reshape computation to sort of better bake in the notions of security, privacy, fairness, and so forth that are so important. We have the opportunity to do really exciting research as we advance on these techniques. In addition to the programs that I've listed here, I will say that I'm very grateful for the members of the CISE community who have participated in a set of workshops that we ran jointly with the Directorate of Social, Behavioral, and Economic Sciences to discuss possibilities towards further future programs. And they include, so the discussions have included themes around reducing disparities in health and education in different types of AI bias, improving the trustworthiness of the information ecosystem, for example, understanding and mitigating misinformation and disinformation, and also empowering and diversifying the technical workforce, both through issues of diversity and inclusion, and also through notions of things like human automation teams. So this is an area where we're already doing a lot. You can check out these programs for more information, and where we see a lot more to come in terms of creating better opportunities for CISE researchers to couple with social scientists to really understand this from both perspectives very effectively. I want to also go through some recent Dear Colleague letters that we have released and make sure that there's an understanding of what's out there and what is the point. So I have 3 Dear Colleague letters listed here with their URLs, or you can go look for more information. So the last thing that I wanted to sort of focus on in this half of the talk is that clearly the past few months have been tumultuous. They've been challenging. We're aware of many impacts on the research community overall and on universities and students and faculty in particular. And this slide attempts to extremely briefly pull together what we know, what we did about what we know, and what we don't know yet. So in particular, we clearly know that universities have had huge budget impacts and they led to hiring freezes. And I'm really proud and grateful of the way the community responded. CISE identified modest funding for an emergency postdoc program called CI Fellows 2020. And I'm thankful to the members of the community that wrote a proposal. I'm thankful to other members of the community that reviewed that proposal externally. And I'm thankful to the NSFers and the policy office that ensured that funding flowed and was able to help out applicants in this year. The response to CI Fellows has been extraordinary, and we'll keep an eye out for what's needed a year from now and see if we need to do this again. It seems likely that we will, and we'll try to prioritize resources to allow for that if we do. Clearly, research stoppages in university labs and other experimental facilities have been challenging. Our field can work remotely in some parts of our field, but there's other parts of our field that are deeply affected. Robotics, human subjects research, some aspects of electronics and semiconductors fall within CISE's purview. So across all of this, we've tried to offer as many budget flexibilities and no-cost extensions as we're allowed to offer, and we keep watching for what is impacting communities and how we can help. We know that there's been a range of time and productivity impacts across our community. Taking your class from a face-to-face format to a remote instruction format was time-consuming. There's been calls on people's time for different types of caregiving responsibilities. Many people's health has been directly impacted. What we have tried to do to help in this regard is CISE and NSF as a whole went to virtual review panels through this full fiscal year. And we've actually gotten good feedback about the virtual review panels. There are many good aspects to them. They allow someone from any geography and with any sort of home responsibilities to engage from where they live rather than having to get to Alexandria to come to NSF in person. We've heard some feedback that especially some of our younger colleagues miss the chance to meet collaborators, meet other research peers in the review panel setting. So we're going to keep looking for best practices on review panels going forward, and with a likelihood of making review panels virtual through the calendar year. Stay tuned on that. Another thing that we did in this category was offer deadline extensions where we could. And this was a really sort of challenging place of threading the needle, because while we are sympathetic to the need for deadline extensions, we're also sympathetic to our mission, which is to give out funding to help the academic community at a time when it has been deeply impacted. And so if we extend deadlines too far, it impedes our ability to give out our money this fiscal year. And so we were trying to balance those two as much as we could. We know that there have been disruptions to student internships and to some REU sites. And so we issued a DCL to offer additional considerable flexibility on REUs. In particular, those faculty who had the time and the energy and the space to do REUs virtually were encouraged to actually ask for more REU slots than would normally be available as a supplement. And we also offered some flexibility about the timing of REUs. There are sort of ongoing question marks about visa policies and so forth. We're keeping an eye on that as well. And finally, I'm really proud of the degree to which researchers have wanted to directly take their skills and help. NSF received $75 million of funding through the CARES Act on what are called rapids, and we have allocated all that funding now on a wide range of COVID-related topics. NSF was also a co-founder of the COVID-19 HPC Consortium to offer supercomputing, advanced computing resources, and on-ramping services for researchers who had ideas that they could bring to bear on the COVID, understanding COVID better. And finally, I want to call your attention to the Civic Innovation Challenge. This is a contest-style approach that NSF is catalyzing. It pairs researchers with community stakeholders to go after challenges in their community. We extended the deadline into August, and we issued a DCL to highlight the opportunities for using the Civic Innovation Challenge to do work in public health, in public education, in public safety that's deeply relevant to some of the challenges we've faced this spring. So I hope you'll check that out. There's obviously a lot we don't know right now in terms of how these different effects up top will affect different demographics of researchers or types of institutions in disparate ways. We don't know how students are going to choose career pathways in the face of everything that's going on. Will more go to graduate school or will fewer? What about retaining people in undergrad? We don't know yet. We're watching. And finally, there's a lot of uncertainty about future federal budgets that we're keeping an eye on as well. But with that as an initial overview, I want to thank you for your time and attention, and I'm happy to take questions. So, hello everyone, and welcome to the live Q&A part of this. I think I'm the first of the live Q&As, so I want to encourage everyone to check out the Slido link that is, I think it's to the side of where you're watching the video. And there's some questions that have been submitted. You can upvote the questions that are there, and you can also post your own. So I'm going to start going through the questions that are there and see where this goes. So one question is about the balance of funding large projects versus smaller projects. And the questioner notes that actually LLVM was funded through relatively modest investments, a career award and some other smaller awards as well. And so I want to note that while it is fun to talk about big centers like the AI Research Institutes, and we're certainly excited about what that scale of $20 million spread across a cohesive set of universities and researchers can do, it's also important to keep in mind the core. 60% of CISE's research budget goes to core, and of that, 60% goes to core smalls. So a considerable part of CISE's research portfolio remains in the core small grants. And it gets back to this tree analogy again. You need to plant a lot of seeds in order to know which ones are going to take off. We're also looking at ways in which we can use PI meetings to link together and research coordination networks to link together people who are receiving small or single PI kinds of funding so that we still have them seeing the full view of the community and building off of each other's work. So we're all, in short, the answer to this question is we're always thinking about that portfolio balance between different sizes and scales. And it's important to me, it's important to the field that we keep funding the core and that we keep funding core smalls in particular. So I mark this one as answered and I move on. Okay, next question. How should department chairs help their assistant professors establish professional relationships with the NSF, and what type of engagement is most effective? That's an awesome question. So one thing is I have been going around and giving virtual campus visits this spring. Normally an AD might go out and do a real physical trip to different campuses to get input from the community. Obviously that wasn't possible this spring. So I switched to virtual visits, and the wonderful silver lining to being virtual is that I've been able to do many more of them. I've actually done around 20 of them so far this spring with more planned. So one thing is, if you're a department chair and you'd like me to do a virtual visit, send me an email on my NSF email address, mmartineau@nsf.gov, and we'll try to get you onto the schedule. We'll almost certainly get you onto the schedule. So that's one. Second thing is that I find the NSF program officers extraordinarily accessible. Like all of us, they've been challenged by time management issues over the past few months of sort of managing home issues as well as work. And also the workload at NSF increased because we had $75 million worth of rapids to give out in quick succession and so forth. Nonetheless, the program officers have managed to be extremely accessible, and I really credit them and thank them for that. So a great way for assistant professors to start a professional relationship with NSF is to find the program officers from the webpage that seem to be the closest match to the programs they'd submit to, email them, and ask about setting up a Zoom meeting. Not everyone has time immediately, but I think you'll get good responses in general. And I think that's a great way to start a conversation. Maybe they can have a couple slides about a proposal they're thinking about submitting and get some advice on where's the best place to submit it within NSF's different programs. So that's one. Another thing is to think about being on a panel. We're often sending out surveys asking for review panelists. All of our panels are virtual from now through the end of the fiscal year, and quite likely through the end of the calendar year as well. And so it's actually, in many ways, it's easier for a broad cross-section of the US geography to participate in review panels right now because you can do it from your home. So I think the notion of getting involved with NSF through either direct conversations with the program officers or review panels are both great. And the last thing I'll say is NSF and CISE, we run a range of proposal writing workshops. We ran a EPSCoR PI workshop for those of you who are in EPSCoR states. We run an annual CISE Career Award proposal writing workshop that's specifically aimed at helping assistant professors interact with program officers and get feedback. So that's a great question. And someone else marked it answered. Awesome. Thank you to my co-pilot, Ron. Let's see, what's the distinction between mid-scale research infrastructure and community research infrastructure? I agree that NSF and CISE together have a range of different infrastructure programs, and it can be hard to navigate them. If I were giving this as a virtual campus visit, I have a backup slide I'd pull up that actually shows a map of the full space. Despite its name, mid-scale research infrastructure is quite large. It's from $6 million to $75 million. It is only mid-scale relative to building a telescope in Hawaii or some sort of large multi-user facility of that type. So mid-scale is actually on the large side of what a CISE researcher would likely propose to. And those are intended to be cases where you can demonstrate a national need for the infrastructure. Stepping stones towards that include the major research instrumentation and the CCRI that's within CISE. And so you can view those as sort of community need that builds towards national need. And there will be an MRI proposal writing workshop, virtual again, in the next couple months, which could be a place where you could get more feedback on whether your idea is right for mid-scale research infrastructure or maybe one of the other programs. Great question. I'm not sure when my second video is going to start, but I'm going to keep answering questions until until they start the next video. Let's see. Is NSF considering supplements to complete research interrupted by COVID? We continued to pay graduate students, but some of the in-person work couldn't be done. So I think there's two questions in here. I'll try to answer them both. So we recognize that some parts of our field were more affected than others by the shift to sort of remote and off-campus work. There's a lot of our field that can operate in an off-campus format with relatively little impact. But if you do human subjects research or robotics, you have been impacted. So in general, we recognize those impacts and we are open to sort of flexible shifts in the research plan and scope related to those impacts. When it comes to supplements, right now, NSF has not received any supplementary funding besides the CARES Act. And so as a result, we're operating with our normal budget. If we are to supplement existing research grants broadly, it would come out of money that would otherwise fund new research grants. And so we aren't inclined to do broad supplements of the work, but we're still sort of sussing out what are the principles for supplements. And there's a lot of in NSF discussions on that front. My various chat streams and question streams tell me that I should pause now and they'll play part 2, and then we can answer more questions after that. So thanks a lot. Hi, everyone, and welcome back. In part 2, I'm going to talk about 2 topics in more detail, namely broadening participation in computing and security and ethics issues. So there's an awful lot of different BPC topics and efforts that I could talk about. Here, I'm going to start with a motivation that comes out of the most recent Talby survey. This one focuses particularly on graduate students. There's other data I could have pulled out as well. Namely, women represent around 20% of US CS PhD graduates. African Americans, Hispanics, and Native Americans together represent around 3% of US CS PhD graduates. And so if you compare that against the US population demographics overall, what you come to is the fact that CS is actually missing out on around 70% of the US population's talents with these kinds of profiles. So what are we going to do about it? Well, first of all, let's recognize what we're missing out on. We're missing out on research visions that would bring us to new and better sort of trajectories in our research. We're missing out on workforce. We're missing out on impactful results. CISE is committed to fostering the careers of a diverse set of researchers because we know that we can't afford to miss out on this talent. So CISE has long worked on BPC issues. So what is new here? What are we doing that's different? One of the things that we have pushed on over the past few years is to try to really move the needle on BPC by asking the full community to engage in BPC efforts. And in particular, we're in year 2 of a 3-year pilot in which we're asking for individual PIs at the medium and large level proposals to all include a meaningful plan with their proposal on how they're going to broaden participation in computing. And the idea is that if we do this as a community, we have a chance of moving the needle. But we know that not every PI has the same level of expertise or experience in this, so how can we make each PI actually be effective as a partner in this work? The key is through giving good options for how they can plug into existing, well-vetted, and evidence-based programs. And for that, we're really happy to have the bpcnet.org webpage stood up, thanks to the folks at CRA and elsewhere who worked on that. This is a resource portal that gives a set of resources for individual PIs to work on, as well as departments to work on. So one way that we can help sort of lift up the BPC efforts of the field overall is by encouraging departments to write departmental BPC plans. And then individual PIs can plug into their department's BPC plan. So that's one. And this webpage offers examples of BPC plans. It offers other resources towards writing your own. And we've been, and the BPC Workshop Steering Committee has been offering a set of workshops to help departments learn how to do this well and to work on their BPC plan. So there's one more of those coming up in August. I hope you'll check it out. In addition, there's a set of partnering resources for individual PIs. So every individual PI can write a BPC plan that couples into their department's BPC plan. But another way to do it is by coupling into other partnering resources, such as the ones that are listed in this menu of resources, also on the same web page. So I would encourage you to check out this web page. It's changing often, and we're really grateful for the community efforts that keep building it up. In addition to the BPC pilot, another area of concerted effort over the past year and a half has been around a set of convenings that CISE has led with different minority serving institutions. And the goal is to make sure that our CISE BPC efforts, and indeed our research portfolio overall, are inclusive of and engaging with MSIs. Our goal is to increase MSI awareness about CISE core programs and to do capacity building to help them write successful, impactful proposals, and to take steps to enhance the engagement of HBCUs, HSIs, and tribal colleges in our NSF CISE core programs. So the way these convenings worked is that there were 3 in 2019 that focused on different types of MSIs. First one on HBCUs, then one for Hispanic serving institutions, and then one for tribal colleges and universities. Finally, in February, there was a bringing together of all of these communities into a full MSI convening in the DC area. So what came out of these? What came out of these was a range of discussions about how CISE could engage better with these communities. At some of the convenings, there were also proposal writing workshops and other forms of capacity building. And there was a sense that enhancing that and improving on that going forward would be great. Other forms of capacity building in terms of ideas labs or other forms of sort of pathways into core funding were also encouraged. We're also looking into enhanced undergrad research opportunities, enhanced fellowships to encourage a transition to graduate programs, and infrastructure opportunities, perhaps collaborative among multiple MSIs. So stay tuned for some outcomes pulled out of these MSI convenings. I can already say that one of the neat outcomes from the HSI event was that it helped inform aspects of House Resolution 4372, the MSI STEM Achievement Act. So those are 2 big efforts, the BPC pilot and the MSI convenings. In addition to this, there are other efforts, particularly at the K-12 and undergraduate level, that have sort of shown great outcomes so far. So the CS for All effort has led now to the standing up of an AP CS principles exam that has demonstrated sort of a huge impact, huge uptake, and improved diversity in who takes AP CS exams in America. The second program that's listed here, the CUE program, is about integrating computing with other fields of knowledge and about cultivating communities of multiple campuses that work together on improving their undergraduate education as a multi-university effort. And finally, all the Q projects are encouraged to integrate the study of ethics into their undergrad curriculum, as we see this as an increasingly important area to focus on. So that was a summary of BPC efforts, and I'm happy to field more questions during the Q&A. I'm now going to go into a bit on security and ethics issues. So let me start with sort of the broad context for this part of my talk. What we know, what I believe, what we all believe is that the vast majority of CS researchers are engaged in the passionate and ethical pursuit of new techniques, new knowledge, and the societal benefits that they result in. We love our field, we want our field to have impact on the world, and we're excited about that. That's the vast majority of us. We also know that the U.S. has greatly benefited from and continues to greatly benefit from its CS research community overall. We are truly a powerhouse that drives economic and societal benefits. And so one way of looking at this is if something is really impactful and really successful, then it behooves us to make sure we take care of it. And hence, some introspection and visioning regarding security and ethics issues in our field is warranted. NSF as a whole commissioned a report in 2019 from the Jason Group on fundamental research security. And I would really encourage you to read the report. It came out in December 2019. It affirms some pretty key principles that I think will be very reassuring for many of us. Namely, it affirms the value of and the need for foreign scientific talent in the U.S. It affirms the significant negative impacts of placing new restrictions on access to fundamental research. It affirms the need to extend our notion of research integrity to include full disclosures of commitments and potential conflicts of interest. And it affirms the need for a common understanding between academia and different U.S. government agencies about how best to navigate the challenges that might exist in this space while still maintaining openness and competing for the global STEM talent. So these are some key principles. In response to it, NSF and the OSTP director wrote responses and are sort of enacting on principles that came out of that report and other discussions. And so what you can see here is Kelvin Drogemeyer as head of OSTP in a December press release talking about how important, how critical principled international collaboration and foreign scientific talent are to the success of the U.S. research enterprise, and looking forward to partnering with the research community to sort of understand and address these complex issues together. So what are some of the complex issues? What are some of the risks? Some of the risks to research integrity that we see have to do with conflicts of interest and commitment, where people are not sort of fully disclosing the different sources of funding that they receive or the different collaborators that they have. There's also issues of confidentiality and ethics in the merit review process and the protection of pre-publication data. So what are some broad science and security goals that NSF has articulated? Well, first of all, the goal is to maintain the vibrancy that we have, a vibrant science and engineering community which collaborates deeply, both globally and domestically. Second of all, to maintain and promote the norms of openness and transparency and collaboration that are so much a part of what we as scientists value in our field. Third of all, to balance that open environment with the needs for security in some cases. And to understand the risks. It's very hard to know what to do without knowing what the scale and scope of the risks are. And so that is this data-driven approach is sort of key to how NSF has embarked down these paths. Take action to mitigate the risks once we understand them well, and share knowledge and best practices so we can move forward on these issues. So that's a pretty high-level intro to where we are. I would strongly encourage that you read the Jason report and NSF follow-ups to it, because I found it very enlightening and frankly very reassuring. I think in addition to that sort of broader NSF view, there's also ways in which there are places that are unique to CISE, in which the ethics of our field are something that we ought to be examining carefully, whether it's the ethics of how to do security research fairly, whether it's the ethics around algorithmic bias. Are there any fields or subtopic areas within our field that we should have qualms about entering into, much like human biology has sort of decided what is appropriate ethically in their field? How do we navigate these questions, and how can we as a community show leadership on these issues? And so I'm ending this part of this talk with questions, because I'm interested in a discussion. I'm interested in identifying how we can be proactive in addressing the concerns that some federal agencies have about security, while also addressing the concerns that scientists have about openness and transparency. And so with that, I will end this part of the talk and be happy to take questions. Thank you. I'm back and I'm happy to field some more questions. And thank you so much for filling up Slido with some good ones. So let's get started. The highest ranked question on Slido right now has to do with CISE consideration of double-blind reviewing, given that it has been shown to reduce bias. And I would say that kind of like I mentioned earlier in the talk, when there's something that you value, something that you treasure, it behooves you to keep an eye on it. And I think when NSF talks about its merit review process, we use the word gold standard. That's a word you hear a lot. And so we definitely, it's something we treasure. It's something we know the community treasures about NSF. And therefore it does make sense for us to watch carefully over it and the trends and discuss where there are options for refining it, either to remove bias, to remove different types of ethical concerns that might play a role. And so I would say that there are some early discussions, not sort of zooming in on double blind anytime immediately, but just early discussions about how we can protect the merit review process that NSF considers to be, and the community considers to be an important part of what we do. So it's on our radar screen as my high order bit of an answer. And I don't think you'll see any short-term dramatic changes, but it's something that we know to keep discussing. So another question. If a campus has multiple computing related departments, does it make sense to join forces on a BPC plan, or is the department the appropriate and accepted level here? I think this is a great question, and I'm glad it's asked because it's one that I wanted to answer. So I actually spent 16 years of my faculty life in an EE department, the computer part of an EE department, before joining a CS department. So this sort of rings true to me. We definitely imagine cases where the computing or the size relevant portions of EE departments, iSchools, statistics departments, and so forth might join forces with the CS department to write a size relevant BPC plan that all the size relevant PIs could plug into. It would be, I think, hard for many EE departments to write a BPC plan overall because so much of their department isn't in computing, it's in physics, it's in other topics. So where you can write a size relevant BPC plan and hook in PIs from multiple departments or hook in efforts from multiple relevant departments, you're certainly welcome to. Thanks. Next one. Do you plan to fund any programs for master's students to do a research-oriented master's? I think the way I would answer this is to say that something that's very much on our minds and on our radar screens, frankly, as a community, as well as within CISE, is the notion of pathways into advanced degree programs, and by that I mean both master's and PhD programs, out of our undergrad programs. And so we have an extraordinary career pathway compared to other STEM fields. In particular, we have these booming enrollments at the undergrad level, unprecedented class sizes and so forth, and yet less than 10% of our undergrad population actually goes on to graduate school. So essentially that booming enrollment takes a left turn into industry, and we fill at the grad level with a broad and talented and wonderful international field. But we would like to make sure that that transition from undergrad to grad is something that all of our domestic undergrads are thinking about. And so we're talking about ways to create fellowship programs that would help incentivize for that. If you read the recent PCAST report that came out 2 weeks ago, you'll see that it's on their mind as well. One of the things that we think is quite important is to give people the chance to think about grad funding, know they might have grad funding, and yet take a few years in industry before they come back in to apply to a grad program. That decoupling of, say, 3 to 5 years can allow people to pay off student loans if they have them, can allow people to take care of different family responsibilities they might have before they sort of regroup and come back into graduate school. It also means that people who have gone through undergrad programs without experiencing research or without having any mentoring about what grad school might offer can find out about the fact that they have a fellowship, think about it a couple of years, and then come back in. So these are definitely things we're discussing. And when we discuss it, we include both master's and PhD in the discussions because we recognize that the real discontinuity we see in our field is between undergrad and grad, both master's and PhD. Thanks. Next, do you expect that our new experiences with work from home might make NSF more flexible about program managers being located outside of DC? I answered this question from the great state of New Jersey. I'm actually teleworking right now from my primary home in New Jersey. NSF has, as an agency, demonstrated, I think, an extraordinary capacity to fulfill its mission over the past 4 months from a telework status. And so it has certainly raised in our minds the sort of what should be the sort of operational plans going forward. How can we take the lessons learned from the past few months and parlay them into being able to sort of garner the talents of a wider set of program officer rotators from a wider set of geographies, a wider set of schools. So it's definitely something we are talking about. I think I benefited from 5 weeks of in-person at NSF before we shifted to a telework world. I think it is harder for someone to be 100% telework and never meet people in person. And so we're trying to figure out ways that people might be able to go back and forth more frequently and to have their home base be primarily their primary home with occasional visits to the DC area in some new normal that we envision. But yes, is it likely to make NSF more flexible? I can certainly say that those conversations have been raised within the foundation, and it's something that we're looking at a lot. So I'm hopeful because I think it will help a lot of great people in our community serve NSF, and we can benefit from their talents. Let's see. What ways do you think CRA and NSF can work well together in the future? So I would be remiss if I didn't sort of have this audience and say a profound thank you to CRA and the community that it convenes in so many different ways. A profound thank you. From March to today, we went from the idea of, oh, we'll probably need something like a CI Fellows Emergency Postdoc program to a written proposal, community members reviewing it, and so forth in what was sort of widely acknowledged to be record time. That's because of CRA's engagement, CRA's convening power with the broader community. And so we're very, very grateful. In terms of ways to work together in the future, I love it when members of the CRA community bring questions and ideas. And I love it when they help sort of write position statements that help NSF make the case for what needs to happen. Those are both great. I think one thing that I always wonder about is that the CISE community and the CRA community are centered over computer science. I wonder about how to get the full engagement of all the parts of the CISE community that may not be today members of CRA and make sure that they're in the mix. And that means both topically, that some parts of EE departments or statistics departments might be relevant to CISE, may not currently be CRA members. It also is true in terms of the types of universities that CRA membership versus who NSF funds. There's a different set of colleges and universities there. NSF being a superset of the CRA set of members. And so understanding how to do that well is another interesting thing to think about. But in general, I think extraordinary gratitude is the high order bit of my answer for this. Thank you for all you do. Let's see. Broader impacts. While NSF values broader impacts, it's not clear to me as a prior panelist that the panelists truly cared about this issue that much. So broader impacts is a federally mandated part of our proposals, right? So it's not just size, it's the full NSF, and it has to be right there alongside intellectual merit. I guess, and let's keep in mind that broader impacts is bigger than broadening participation in computing. Broader impacts is everything. Broader impacts is saying that your proposal might help with the environment if it's about a smart cities proposal, or if it's about power efficient computing. Broader impacts might be about job creation or sort of smart manufacturing and the way it might lead to an economic stimulus. So broader impacts is a big set of things. And I would say that if a panelist can't care about impact, that makes me a little sad, because I think that not just as researchers or as reviewers, but frankly, as taxpayers and as citizens of the world, we ought to occasionally think about the impact of our work and the implications of the work that people are proposing. And we ought to be able to tell the story of those implications to each other as researchers, and frankly, to the broader community. I always feel like it's my responsibility to be able to tell my neighbors why NSF exists and why it matters. And that's the job I took on when I became AD. But frankly, it's also your responsibility as a researcher to be able to tell your neighbors why your research matters, because otherwise your neighbors and the general population only see the sort of very end of the innovation pipeline where it comes to commercial computing products, and they don't see the huge lead up in research that led to them. They don't see the broad societal impacts that might not have a commercial impact, but are still super important to our field. And so I think that if we sort of rethink our mission to be that we have to be able to tell the story of why our research matters, then hopefully everyone can get motivated by that version of the mission. Thanks. How is NSF going to address the challenges in recruiting and retaining doctoral students in general? Well, I said one part of the puzzle, which is the notion of seeing whether there are ways to create fellowships with some decoupling in time that would help more people learn about graduate school, consider graduate school, and then come to graduate school when they're ready for it. I think that's one aspect of it. I think we should also think about how we, again, make the case for graduate school in a world where so many people can go off and do things after undergrad that they find very enriching. What is the case for graduate school? I think we need to be able to tell the story of the unique scientific and social impacts of our work in order to help early career researchers understand why it matters, and help early career researchers understand what they can do in academia that maybe they can't do through industry careers. The degree of freedom, the variety, the fun that we all have in nurturing the next set of researchers and careers. These are all things that are hugely important, and I think hopefully can be motivating to early career folks who I think they see a lot about what industry has to offer, and we need to be able to tell the story of what academia has to offer, not to the exclusion of going into industry, but just to give a full portrayal of the many exciting opportunities in our field. Great. Can you speak to the range of institution types you hope to fund as a part of a National AI Institute, HBCUs, HSIs, community colleges, in addition to R1s. So this second part of the talk, I did go into some of the MSI convenings that we had over the past year, and I'm very grateful, again, to the community members and to the NSFers who organized that set of convenings, because it was a very rich set of discussions. And I think we do need to think about what are the set of opportunities that we can create for capacity building across a wide range of institutions. And so some of the ideas that we've had are to couple different scales of research funding together into PI meetings that span scales, so that the PIs from the AI research institutes would attend PI meetings with related topic area PIs from the core or from other programs in order to build up communities that span these different funding levels, and in order to sort of encourage new proposals that couple together PIs, help PIs meet each other for collaborative purposes and couple these things together going forward. We're also sort of watching programs like Fisk Vanderbilt and others that have couplings of R1s with MSIs in different ways to understand where we can do more there. And I think we're open to different ideas on a lot of these fronts. I think the one thing I would say is I have tried very hard to not use the word pipeline in this or other talks. I don't believe in the linearity of stepping stones through a career. And so where I see something like community college here in this question, what I know is that people come in and out of formal training at different points in their career, and they come in and out of computing at different points in their career. And they come in and out of research at different points in their career. And we, as a field and as a funding agency, need to provide the programs and the incentives and the information that helps people make those hops, those transitions back and forth effectively. And that means both helping the individuals who are trying to do the hopping, and it also means capacity building at these different types of academic institutions, K through 12, community colleges, undergrad, and grad of different types, in order to make sure that the full talent pool sees these opportunities. Let's see. Do I foresee any grand challenge type funding for CISE based on recent White House executive orders in science and technology areas? So I think the way to think about this is that CISE and NSF try to tell the story of the impact of our research and the opportunities of future research endeavors in our field. And you saw me tell some of that story through the 3 themes that I gave. And we're often in conversation with different folks around government about, here are the opportunities we could go after. Here are the proposals that we received that are sort of steps towards those opportunities. Here's how many of them were highly ranked, meaning HC or C, highly competitive or competitive, to use the CISE review parlance. And here's how many of those highly ranked proposals we could not fund because we didn't have the resources available. And so we do tell the story of the opportunity cost of the resources we don't have, the proposals we can't fund. And in some cases, as you saw in my first talk, that has been viewed as being part of what tilted towards, for example, plus-ups in certain topic areas that are deemed to be national priorities. And we showed the research opportunities that could not be fully funded right now. So that's the kind of conversation that we've been having. Maybe I'm going to pause here. I'm going to say I have time for one last question. So if you want to sort of quickly click on some likes so that the last question is truly the crowd favorite, click like now and we'll see what happens. I think I answered the one that is currently top ranked about supplements, namely we're having discussions. So I'm going to answer Maria Jeannie's question. The intellectual contributions are assessed after funding by publications. How is BPC assessed, and also broader impacts? This is an extraordinarily good question. It's a question that I get a lot when I do the virtual campus visits. And I'm frankly, I'm in listening mode. I think there are ways for a person's contributions to BPC efforts to be documented either by department chairs or by the partners with whom they partner to enact these kinds of efforts. And so we could see more of a sort of support letter or something else that helps to document these kinds of efforts going forward. I think it would be great to figure out how to actually measure these contributions, because I'm an experimentalist. You can't improve things that you can't measure. That's my worldview, and it's hard to get rid of that. So I think figuring out ways to at least qualitatively, if not quantitatively, assess and track these things should be an important priority for our community going forward. I'm open to ideas. I have some ideas about letters of support, but if you have other ideas, this could be a great way that CRA and NSF could work together. It'd be great to see CRA bring its brain power together around coming up with a bullet list of ideas or a white paper on this. Awesome. Thank you. I don't know if maybe one last question. What new ways do you envision industry and NSF working together? This is a great question to end on, because if you saw Panch's enthusiastic remarks, Panch is big on partnerships, which is, frankly, it's wonderful for CISE to see, because CISE has been big on partnerships for about 10 years. And it's a nice confluence to see that coming at all levels out of NSF. We have done literally 10 years of partnerships with industry in different ways. For example, one-to-one matches on research programs where NSF runs the merit review process in its NSF gold standard way, but industry contributes funds, and industry can engage with the researchers once they're funded. So that's something. We also see opportunities for cloud resources and coordination around moving towards the national research cloud that has been sort of much talked about in the news. And that's something that CISE is piloting through the Cloud Bank effort right now. So we could see industry there. And frankly, I mentioned this notion of fellowships that help our domestic our CS undergrads think about graduate school. I think that's a place where it would be really interesting to have industry's engagement on how can we make this work, because the overall workforce set of pathways that we'd be cultivating by that through advanced degrees in larger numbers would help industry too. And it would be nice to have a conversation around what would industry partnerships for such a fellowship program mean? How would they look? How can we sort of pull together as a field to do that? So thanks for that great question. Okay, I think that was my last question. And my many chat streams are now telling me that after this point, I am going to encourage you to join back at 1 p.m. Eastern, aka 10 a.m. on the West Coast and everything in between, for the next session, which is on challenges of teaching in times of COVID. Thanks a lot. This was super fun. I really appreciate your time and your attention, and I hope to see you in real life sometime soon. Take care.